He's younger than us last. That's true. You probably
Let's start, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we will continue with this sixth and the last session. It's been a long journey for all of us. It was a tiring journey as well. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start with a little bit summary as usual. So far in first day, we started with establishing the need for prophethood. And we said it's not just a coincidence that we have a prophet. In actuality, we need, as a human being, we need a prophet which brings us the message, the Quran, the revelation. And it will be, I guess, become clearer in the session, we hope, that the revelation actually shouldn't be considered as just as the Quran, but we will discuss a little bit more about the life of the prophet, or what is manifested through life of the prophet. It is kind of, let's say for now, it's a kind of the revelation as well. So the both goes hand in hand. And then we talk about some practicalities, maybe there's some specifications. We said, okay, we're talking about the need for the prophet, and we know that the Muhammad ﷺ comes with, the message and saying that I am the prophet that you are looking for. And we studied whether, what we know about him is really fit what a human being would need from the prophet, and whether what he brings, both with his life and the message that he carried, whether it satisfied human needs or not. And then, previous session, we asked the question, what kind of connection we have today in our life with the prophet. And we went over the narrations, because this is the primary, let's say, the source of a connection with the prophet. At least this is what traditionally taught. And we said whether having an access to prophet through narrations, or maybe through the pages of history, being a prophet, a historical figure, whether it is a problem for us or not, whether can we rely on the information coming to these historical sources about the prophet. And we said, if we are honest to ourselves, if we study ourselves in a more detail, we realize that everything in our life actually has a historical perspective, even the feelings that we have, or the senses. That I touch this chair, and the sense has a historical nature, and the historical nature in our daily life even goes beyond a few centuries. So 14 centuries that we talk about when we refer to prophet, it's not a big deal at all. Like, this is how we embed it in this reality. And so you can look at the recording of the previous session, of course, if you are interested on that. And we also touched upon the ways that the narrations are carried to us, and we said they are actually pretty much reliable, trustworthy. So we don't have any reason to categorize them as something different than the other sources we always rely in our lives, and especially in our most needy moments. As important as having a brain surgery, for instance. The information that we rely on when we have a tumor and having a brain surgery is not anything different than the information we rely on when it comes to the prophet, our relationship with the prophet. So maybe as a take-home message, we said instead of covering our intentions about just cutting the connection with the prophet and using these excuses about it's being historical and the narrations being not trustworthy and so on, what we should be doing instead, acknowledging our need for the prophet, as we established in previous sessions, acknowledging our need for a prophet and seeing that what we have in front of us, realizing that they are not anything different than other sources that we always rely, and try to benefit as much as you can from them. There might be some untrustworthy narrations or weak narrations or noisy narrations, let's say. It is a possibility, it's a fact, like everything else in our life. So we should try to benefit them as much as possible. And we will again touch upon that in this last session as well. And when we try to benefit from these narrations, we should never forget, we must not forget that the protagonist, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm sorry. The main character, main actor in these narrations is a prophet. It's not a politician, it's not a scientist, it's not an artist, it's not the military guy, the state person or whatever. He's a prophet. Whatever he says or he does or he just keeps in silence should be understood from a perspective that it is connected with the Creator, our sustainer, our Rabb. That's the point. Even when he's talking about sun, let's say we went over an example, a narration about sun. When he talks about sun, he's not trying to give us the mechanical understanding of how sun moves. This is not the prophet. He's a scientist. But he is a prophet. When he talks about sun, he's talking about something about the creator of the sun. This is his point. And he's talking about hereafter, what suns refers to in the hereafter. So this is how we should be approaching the narrations. And then we concluded the previous session with the question, okay, even if these narrations are trustworthy, they are still just narrations. Like if you compile them, it will be another book. But we started with the question, we started with the need for a human guide in our life. So if you are telling me that there was a human guide once upon a time, and he died, and all you have now is a book, another book, which is compilation of some narrations, then you are not giving me the real answer then. And I don't have any human guide in my life. What am I going to do with this? So I guess we left there, and let's see how Love Suhail will take us from there.
So, I mean, I guess you kind of touched up on my first question, and the first question was that we did talk about it in the last session a little bit, but how do you address the fact that I need a guide, here and now, at least 2022, or as I'm living right now? So it's reasonable to say that, he happened to be, but where is he now right now in my life, practically speaking?
So I think I would say, again, let's try to see. Let's ask the question like what we understood, what we understand when we say prophet, what we really mean. So there are multiple aspects for sure. Like one thing is he's being a human, like a human being. He had a physical He had a physical form. He was a human being. He lived in a certain period of time, a certain time in a certain place, and so on. This is one aspect, of course. I guess this is the simplest aspect of the prophet. So the definition we used from the beginning, from the very first session for the prophet was kind of the idea of this as a teaching assistant. Like if you take a Rab as a teacher, Lord, teaching us, our Rab, it's being our sustainer, taking care of us, guiding us constantly. The prophet is, again, kind of the analogies are never perfect. It's kind of a teaching assistant, like trained by the Rab specifically for this purpose, and being true and training himself, and then teaching us, guiding us practically how we manifest, how we live the scripture, the revelation. So this is another aspect. He's being instructor, or he's being a model for us, an example for us, an example by life. It's not an image. Like today, for instance, we have this image on social media, and we have role models, quote unquote. It's not the same thing. We're talking about the real life and every details of the life. So I found it very charming.
So not something that you want people to see only.
Yeah, exactly. So this is reality, your reality as well. I find it really charming. Like I remember reading about, or maybe hearing about a hadith, and I apologize in advance. Like when I narrate something, it's always partial. May Allah forgive me for that. But to the extent I remember, a person visits, the town of the believers, let's say the companions, the Sahaba, and he's trying to get familiar with what they believe and so on, or maybe he was just there to ridicule them, so it's not known. But he's asking, like, I heard that your prophet even teaches you how to go to the restroom and what to do there, how to do it, and so on. And the Sahaba, the companion, with excitement, he says, yes, this is true, this is our prophet. Like he was so into it. And today, maybe in our modern society, we find it maybe a little bit, awkward. But to me, again, it was so charming. Like, this is the instructor, this is the role model I need. Like with every aspect of my life, he will be an example for me.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like I could ask a question about every aspect of my life, even going to the restroom. How do you conduct yourself when going to the restroom? Because there's a question for every aspect of my life. For something that I think is just, why do I need instruction? But you could, if you think about it, yeah, you do. Now, I guess practically, where are these principles enshrined? Like, where are they? Where can I actually look to say, this is what he did, or what I think he did potentially, and this is how I should act accordingly.
So again, let's continue with the different aspects of prophet. So we said, okay, he's a teaching assistant, or he's an instructor, he's a model, the exemplar, the living Quran. This is how his wife, Aisha radiallahu anha, how she would define him, right?
Yeah.
Like a living Quran. When companions ask her about, his character or his morals, she would say, "Don't you read Quran?" Like he is the living, walking Quran. So he is the humanly manifestation of Quran. So this again one aspect. The second aspect we said. Now you are asking about the sunnah,
Yeah.
or his path, his way,
Yes.
the principles, that the way he interpreted the revelation, the way he lived the revelation. So I guess we could summarize it as his manners, his morals, his character, or again, the principles, how he applied them onto life. So this is another aspect of prophethood. So there are, and these aspects, when we talk about the morals, the character, the principles or manners, they easily go beyond time and space. So we still have connection with the prophet from this perspective, I would say. So we most of the time take things for granted. So for instance, we act in a certain way. Yusuf, for instance, he never lies, let's say. He does not. I mean, I never witnessed that he lied in practicality, alhamdulillah. He does not lie, and I take it for granted, like, yeah, this is, a fact, because a good human being should be that way. But when I think about it, and if I ask him, I'm sure he had a model in his life, and if we follow the chain, it would eventually go to a prophet.
Yes. Yeah.
So these characters, these morals, again, easily go beyond time, and we have access to them. Not that one day he thought, oh, I must be not lie. No, there's the idea of not lying through revelation, but also through people, through some other medium, reached to him. So nowadays I'm trying to practice to, what extent God knows, but I'm trying to practice when something nice happens, let's say, in my actions or in my attitude and so on. If somebody finds something, pleasable, let's say, I try to say, yeah, this is how I learned from my prophet, or this is how I learned from my religion, this is my religious duty. So that, first and foremost, I don't take it for granted. And then rest would know, the others will also know, it's not coming from, the sky. It's coming from a source that goes beyond time. So I guess making this connection is important. This is another aspect of the prophet. So there's yet another one, which is from the beginning, we see that when we look at his seerah, from the beginning, maybe from the first day, even, like, if it wouldn't be exaggeration, let's say once he recovered from the initial excitement, let's say, one of the first things he did was establishing a school. Physically or not, metaphorically or not, it's another question, but he started at school, meaning that he started training people around him. And he trained them so hard, not like, us today, how we train each other or how we are trained in school. They would, come together almost every day for several hours, despite all the objections and the suppression and so on and so forth. He spent a lot of time with his core companions to train them. So this school is another, the aspect of the prophet. When we say prophet, also this school must come to our minds as well. Because the school was not, it didn't start somewhere in some time point and then stop. It continued throughout the centuries. He trained the companions, and then companions trained their followers, and then trained their followers, and then so on, so on, so on, until it reaches to us as well. Today, we do have people around us, right, who are somehow being trained with this chain, the school of thought. They spend some time to learn about the prophet and his manners and his characters and so on. So this training is still going on.
Happening today.
Exactly. So again, it's a timeless matter. So this is another aspect of the prophet. And then, so when we see that, we realize that the idea of prophethood actually, it starts with the person, the human being, the physical being, but easily becomes a living creature, like a living tree, which spans centuries. It didn't stop there. A living tree whose leaves, maybe, are the scholars or imams, however you want to call them, or your friends, somehow connected to this tree, to prophet. And we see that actually it's been the case from the beginning of the humanity. Isn't it like extremely interesting? I find it really interesting. So not surprising way interesting, but so important that we need to contemplate that the first human being was the first prophet. The prophet Adam alayhi salam. So that the prophethood started with the first human. It was always there in the human life. So within the humanity, prophethood was always there from the beginning.
I guess you could say that's what makes somebody human is prophethood.
Exactly. Yeah. So without a prophethood, yeah, in a true sense, we wouldn't even be able to talk about a humanity.
Yeah.
The existence of prophet makes the humanity as we know today possible. And again, today, we have a glimpse, at least for now, that this living tree, the prophethood, still lives in different ways. Yes, we don't have, as a human person, a prophethood among us. We say Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam was the end of the prophethood as a profession, like if we say, as a person who's been trained by the Rab, but again, the leaves, the branches of this tree still with us today. The scholars.
So I guess, to summarize what you're saying that one, who is this prophet for us? What's his sort of, how do we see him as, and you mentioned the, practical relationship, even going to the restaurant, is that he's defining, and providing instruction for every aspect of our life, because it's a question we have for every aspect of our life. And he does so in reference to, as you mentioned, the creator and then to the afterlife. And the people around him are the first ones to have absorbed his teachings, and those teachings subsequently will pass down from generation to generation. The people who imbued his teachings into their life. Is that kind of what you were saying? Or
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And everybody essentially, whether they realize it or not, it's interesting because you bring up the idea that just the simple notion, like the idea that you shouldn't lie. In some sense, while it is like human to say that one shouldn't lie, I kind of have this impression that it really sort of becomes solidified, at least in people who have a prophethood tradition. For example, or what should I say, that these virtues you hold dear, they've kind of been known throughout history, so to speak. And if you trace it back far enough, you find that they were probably connected to some prophet, whether it was Moses, Jesus, Abraham, the Judean prophets, maybe even Buddha was a prophet, I don't know. So, or Krishna, maybe they were prophets. But some of these sort of virtues, nobody can escape prophethood. as you said, it starts from the first human being. You can't just in a vacuum say that I have these principles and I don't, because you were informed by them, by society. And even if society is secular, they probably, I mean, even in Western society, their principles are already informed by, Christianity largely, and that ties to some extent to prophethood. So you can't escape it. And,
Maybe if I
yeah,
allow to interject something. So from an I apologize for the word choice here, but from an animal perspective,
yeah,
we would still have some principles.
correct. Yes.
Like even an animal, even a cattle, is attracted to something and then repelled from another thing.
Yeah.
Right? They do have principles. Like animal, for instance, if it's not in its nature, would escape from something dirty.
Yeah.
Right? The same way. So it is possible to say that the certain morals or principles would be there even if we didn't have revelation or the prophet with us, but it would be as let's say as fine as an animal's instinct.
Correct. Yeah.
So I wouldn't lie because I would say it's not something nice,
Nice.
or it is bad for the society.
Exactly.
It's an animal,
Yeah.
like an animal perspective.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
But going back to the previous sessions, like Ikra, Bismillah, Rab, like reading it in the name of Rab, not lying and tying this with your creator, your Lord,
Vertical relationship.
and your
Yeah.
hereafter.
Yeah.
It is only possible through revelation and the prophet.
Yeah.
As a human being, not lying as an animal, yes, it's a possibility through some ethics or morality, but not lying as a human being is only possible through prophethood.
Let me ask you something. So you mentioned something about like the people transmitting his practices through time or space and time, I guess. Do we? Is there really necessity for do we need to follow his companions? Can't we just here's a book summarizing his principles, here, live by it?
That's like interesting question because this is most of the time what we do.
Yeah.
Like I would say, unfortunately, for first and foremost myself, when we think about making a connection with the prophet, the only thing I do, is to the extent I do. Like even that part is questionable. But the only thing I do would be reading a book.
Correct. Yeah.
Again, the book that compiles some narrations about the prophet. But I guess that this is great, like we should do that. It's a starting point. But I guess if we say that this is how we make a connection with the prophet, just reading the book, then we are missing the point again. Because the prophet is there as a practical living example. So we talk about that in the previous session, maybe first session today. The prophet shows us how to become an abd, the worshipper. And you know what abd is. You know how become an abd yourself in the real sense. Only through observing it, seeing it, experiencing it. So you should have such a connection with your prophet. So you need this tradition, if I may say, a tradition of living the life. The Sunnah, maybe we should expand it later, but the Sunnah as it is exemplified by person, by people. This is what we need. So book would be great, and alhamdulillah, we have these books. Like I always say that no matter how much we respect people who wrote these books, about the narrations of the how like compiled these books. And Bukhari, may Allah please with him. Or the people who wrote these Sirah books and the trustworthy sources, no matter how much we respect them, it wouldn't be enough. Like the job they did was really exceptional. The seriousness, sincerity they put in their work, like they devoted their entire life. This is something exceptional. Like we don't have such examples. So anyway, this like as a side note, I always get emotional that it's such a respectful thing. Alhamdulillah, we have this. But at the same time, we need, again, the experiential element as well. We need to see it. We need to live this tradition.
You know, I was thinking about the last hadith that we posted. There's a little bit like a different human element when you read a narration that involves another human being asking a question and then him responding, because it almost takes you back to that situation as if you're there, like, oh, maybe you're the one asking the question and he's talking to you. Whereas if you just give somebody a principle, here, just live by this principle, as you said, it's devoid of that human element. Yeah, there's still some truth there, but you don't kind of get the experience of how he would have been teaching his companions at that time. And I guess that's probably the importance of seeing real life examples today, because if, as you say, people are connected with the root, the tree, and we're all just branches, then it's important to, connect back to the root through human beings. You can't necessarily just get that from books alone.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, how, I mean, I guess this is kind of, we talked about this in the last talk, but it was brought up in the last session, but this idea that maybe along the way, because we are relying on human beings, is there some sort of distortion taking place along the way, potentially, possibly?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is maybe the first thing come to our mind, right? So we're talking about something being transferred from one person to another person, and we are not only talking about now, at least. In the previous session, we were talking about the words of prophet, for instance. When we say narrations, it was about what the prophet ﷺ did, what he said, and it was like just recording them and narrating.
So you're making a difference between what he said and sunnah then?
Yeah, exactly. But now we are talking about the transmission of something more than what he said, how he acted, how he lived. So the tradition that I'm talking about is how prophet lived and how people around him observed and tried to imitate this within their own context. That's also important, right? Yeah. I mean, the distortion is one thing, but also there's this change based on the context. So throughout his history, across centuries, how people, all these great scholars, would implement the same tradition they learned from the prophet or the followers of the prophet, would change based on the context they lived in or the time they lived in. So for instance, today we're talking about how to write a play, for instance, which was not there before. So anyway, there's this the inevitable change as well. But at the same time, as you said, distortion, is it possible? Yeah, like we distort things, the things gets distorted over time. It's true, but we discussed this, of course.
Well, I guess let me ask you, what? Maybe I should ask myself that question. What does distortion mean? Because does that mean, because I can't escape the fact that I interpret something, like just me observing you, I would interpret it in a certain way. Is that distortion or is that, what is that? Just interpretation? Like, what's the definition of distortion?
Like with distortion, I would take it as like something being shown to me or narrated to me, which is not actually which was not there
I see.
with the prophet. Like one example would be, so I'm talking about the tradition, right?
Yeah.
The tradition of the way of prophet. Let's put it that way. The way of prophet.
So, and you're calling that sunnah,
Yes.
different than hadith, just to clarify.
The hadith is just a medium
Correct.
of these narrations.
I just want to clarify.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's just a medium, what we read.
Yeah.
What we get out of it,
that's sunnah.
the principles, the way, is the sunnah. The pattern we extract from it is the sunnah. Going back to the tradition or the way, so it is easy to confuse it with the culture. So we, unfortunately, again, tend to learn, or we have this, let's say, the limitation today, learning the religion through our culture and thinking that they are the same thing. In our culture, for instance, may Allah forgive us, most of us, like we here have different cultures, but some of us, let's say, in some cultures, we treat women in bad way. And we think this is part of the religion. Because all, the people who are from the same culture, they call themselves Muslim. And there's something unique, not unique, the common to them, which is treating women bad. So this is a kind of distortion, for instance, right? So this is not the religion, this is not the way of the prophet. It's just the opposite. For some reason, today, this is the, let's say, a common pattern. So we can, I guess, increase the examples. So we shouldn't, the way of prophet, the sunnah or the tradition with the culture, it would be huge difference, huge injustice. Yes, there are great elements in our cultures, there are elements coming from the way of prophet, but the culture itself is just the, a synthetic, let's say, a made up thing that we human come up most of the times. But anyway, so the distortion will be always there, but as we discussed in the previous session, that there's things coming from the history or being historical or being narrated, it's not an issue. It's a common fact that we cannot escape. Like everything in our life, comes to us in the same way. So no reason to repeat it. We can check the previous session if we are interested. But there's another thing I'd like to mention, that when the thing that will be transferred from the centuries is the human life. So it is a human life that being, conveyed from prophet to us, the human life. When this is the case, the best medium of transfer is the human being, a human life. A human life can be transferred in the best way through another human life. That's the best way. So we have this misconception that saying that if we had video recordings, audio recordings in the time of the prophet, it would be much better. Everything would be much, clearer. Because we think, they are more trustworthy. Accurate. This is definitely, it might be my personal and bold claim, but I really believe this, that this is too far from reality. If you want to, again, preserve a human life, like a way of living, the best medium of transfer It's not a compact disc or USB flash drive, a video camera.
Yeah.
It's a human life. Another human observing and then imitating, living, and then another person
Right, yeah.
observing the same person, and so on and so forth.
I mean, it's interesting you mention that, because if it were just simply, oh, his life was on CD, on 3-part CD or something, you know, you potentially, like, as you said, like one human to another, you may not have had as big of a spread. Like the fact that it even probably testifies more so the fact that what people were interpreting was appropriate, because how else would it have spread so far so quickly if it wasn't, people didn't find it compatible with themselves. So, and then the other thing, as you mentioned, there's a sort of human element that you can't grab from like a video or an audio. And you have a little bit, but it's not the same as seeing somebody, like you said, in person.
Or from books.
Or from books, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think about the 4 levels of like transmission, like transcript, like reading like a transcription, just text. Then there's audio, then there's video, and then there's the real life
Exactly.
person. So
yeah, we should get familiar with this idea, I think. Like human life as we live preserve something very precious, which is whatever we observe around us.
yeah,
So like you are a living recorder of the every life around you. One way or another,
correct.
it's
Yes.
distorted or not. Yes, it is. It is noisy. Yes, it is noisy.
Yeah.
But this is the fact. This is how our universe is created. We see such old distortions and noise everywhere.
Yeah, it's another practical example. I was thinking, with like COVID, I'm sure people here had to use like Zoom, like Zoom or some sort of video. And I was listening somewhere that people within a year got Zoom fatigue. I mean, I think like people here did too. And somebody was giving us like a scientific explanation, like a human explanation, or if they said scientific, that people have a hard time doing video because how you interact with somebody in person is very different than how you interact with somebody over video. And it's fatiguing to interact with somebody over video because you don't, like, there's so much indirect language that with video you have to pay closer to, because you have to watch them all the time. Whereas if in person, you don't have to. There's a sense of like body language or the feeling you get that you does not convey over video.
Sense of everything, like
Yeah.
it's infinitely different senses we have.
Yeah.
Like they tell us, we have 5 senses,
Yeah.
the taste, the touch, and whatever. Yeah, but we have them. But a human being have infinitely many senses.
Yeah.
And when I interact with you, when I observe you, all my senses, to the greatest degree, they are in work.
Yeah.
So this is the recording capacity I have as a human being. Again, another misconception, like when we think about the scholars, for instance, what is the first thing that comes to our minds? The books they wrote.
Yeah.
We say Imam Shafi, Imam Hanafi, Imam Rabbani, radiallahu anhu. The first thing comes to our mind is the books they wrote, as if this is the most important thing about them, which is important. Again, alhamdulillah, may Allah be pleased with them, we have them. These books are so precious. But I think even the more important thing is how they lived their life, how they tried to imitate or implement, let's say. Imitation would be awkward because the context is changing constantly. How they implement what they learned from the Prophet, what they believe, how they lived what they believe. This is more important. The book is only one kind of manifestation of it, one fruit of it. But imagine people who lived around Imam Rabbani. Can you imagine the benefit they got from him? Not only reading the book, but observing him. And then they imagine the people who lived around, Imam Hanafi, for instance, or any other great scholars you can think of. When we think about the scholars, I guess we should again get familiar with the idea that we should think about the people who lived around them. What kind of interactions they had. So yeah, but maybe I cannot see, but at least conceptually, I should be trying to get into that. And the books, it's another fruit that I can benefit today as well. But again, human life and its preservation through another human life.
So who are these people then? I mean, you mentioned some of them, but are there certain classes of people who are the most reliable, who should be looking to, that preserve this way, this sunnah?
So I guess it starts with, again, the prophet and his close companions, of course, and maybe more important, his family, Ahlul Bayt. So we can take it in different ways, like his family, his wife, Aisha radiallahu anha, or Imam Ali radiallahu anha. So we can take the family in different ways. We can take it as a blood relationship. We can take it as, maybe closeness to his not duty, but let's say his purpose. Really close companions, for instance, like Abu Bakr Siddiq. So we mentioned this before several times, but we see something interesting with the Prophet's life, his family life, his private life, which is sometimes, used to attack the idea of Prophet or Islam in general. For instance, he's having multiple wives. One of them being, there's discussions I don't really like. I'm not an expert, and I'm not that much interested in such technical details. Not because they are not important, but like Birkan, like it is a personal thing. This is not my interest. I'm not interested in geography, for instance, right? The same thing. It doesn't mean the geography is something bad. If people are interested, they should study this, like what was her age and so on. But having multiple wives and some of them being young, let's say, this is interesting. And to me, it perfectly fits the purpose of prophethood and this tradition that we talked about. So when we look at the life of the prophet and the lives of the companions around him, they were almost, at least some of them, the ones like Abu Hurairah, they were constantly watching him. Like whatever he does, they would follow him. They would look at how he does not, and so on. Or there are certain figures like Imam Ali, they would be with him from very young age, or his young wife again, witnessing his private life throughout their entire life, recording, preserving all these details so that it will reach to us. So the responsibility, or the purpose they fulfill by doing so is tremendous. This is how we make connection today, right, with the Prophet, through them. We know everything about Prophet, every tiny detail about his life. So if you ask me, it was not a coincidence, or it was not simply a cultural thing that he had multiple wives. That's sometimes how we approach it. Like, oh, in his culture, that was the tradition. And yes, it was maybe. But it also fulfills an extremely important duty. From different angles, I have his life with me today. So his family, his close companions, and then the people who were trained by these companions, and then the people who were trained by these companions, and their descendants. Again, with the Imam Ali, radiallahu anhu, we have his descendants, like the Sayyid Hassan, radiallahu anhu, and their descendants, preserving what they, observe, what they see, what they experience with the Prophet. So all these peoples are the medium of transfer for us. Reaching today as well, like all these, again, scholarly lineage. There's no need to, to give all these names we know. I'm not the best person anyway. But all these great scholars who revived religion, there's such a concept, right? Reviving the religion or the concept of the religion in their times. The scholars like Abu Hanifa, Abu Shafi, Imam Shafi, and so on and so forth. But maybe also another thing we should consider, like these are the known names, and they were never another aspect, like another common thing about these scholars or these companions. They were never, after, let's say, first, fourth Halif, what is the English word for it? Sorry. Khalifa? Vicegerent. Okay, vicegerent. We see that most of the descendants of the Prophet and the people around them were not part of the, let's say, the history as, I don't know how to say, but they were not in the ruling, let's say, among the ruling elite. They were kind of...
They were mostly persecuted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They spent their life in prisons. Some of them were killed and so on. So they, from a qadar perspective, if I may say, they were preserved from all kind of distortions that the politics or the power and so on would cause.
Yeah.
So we see another kind of preservation there. So they are preserving life of the Prophet, and by qadar, divine determining, they are themselves preserved from the games of the politics. Not by being among the politicians or the kings, maybe spending their lives in prisons, but even tasting the power may distort the people. So they were preserved from that. That's interesting. So it also gives an idea that the lineage, we shouldn't look for it among the people of power. Oh, he was the great leader of the something world, Muslim world, whatever, however you call it. He was the great king. He was the great strategist, or he was the great. You shouldn't look for scholars anymore, imams among them. Look at the prisons most of the times. So, or among people, among let's say ordinary people.
I mean, I think we touched upon this already, but just to reiterate, what are we trying to get from these people to begin with? Are we, well, I guess what is being conveyed to us from them? You know, are they just reading hadith and just practically implementing in their life? What are they doing, and what are we going to get from them?
So I guess, again, it goes back to what we understand from Sunnah.
Yeah.
So the way I understand Sunnah is the idea or concept that I extract from this, the practical actions or saying or keeping his silence of the Prophet. So the fact that, for instance, he was, let's say, trimming his beard in a certain way, it's a hadith, it's a narration that comes to me. But what I understand from it, the principle, how he made the connection between his beard and his creator, this is the sunnah that I would extract from it, the idea behind it. Or again, the principle behind it. The manners that he approached to revelation. So he would read Quran and he would understand something out of it. And then he would manifest this understanding through his life. So this is what is conveyed through these people. So his sunnah, again, the way he understood the revelation, the way he lived the revelation. And of course, beyond that, certain practices, how he prayed, how many times he prayed, how he cleaned his hand, or so on. These are also another elements, but these are not the only or the main elements. And of course, on top of that, his morals, the character, whether he was, speaking in a certain way or another way. So these are, again, the practical manifestations. But beyond them as well, like if he is, for instance, keeping quiet, like speaking quiet, how he tied this being quiet to being an abd, being a worshipper of the Creator. He was not speaking quiet because he was respecting the people among him, around him. Oh, I'm talking to, the great rulers of the Quraysh, so I should speak quiet, for instance. That was not his attitude. He was not he was not using a strategy, let's say. This is how we do usually, right? We say, okay, let me keep quiet so that this happens or that happens. No. If he was keeping quiet or speaking quietly, because he was manifesting the humility of abdness. So this is what I understand from the Sunnah, and this is what is being conveyed to me today.
It's interesting. I mean, you make a distinction between, as you mentioned, hadith and sunnah, but also like these morals or good virtues. It's one thing to say like, don't lie or speak softly or don't get angry. And parents may teach their kids that, but it doesn't mean anything just in a vacuum. Like what it means, so what if somebody doesn't or doesn't get angry? As you said earlier about animalistic ethics, I don't really call it morality, but ethics. How we deal with people, but it doesn't have a vertical relationship if you don't see it as how does this represent who I am as an artist, or my relationship with my creator, and that to me is a very important aspect of the Sunnah, is that it makes that apparent to me or known to me.
I guess same as the revelation. So maybe we should iterate this again and again. Like we cannot make a distinction. That is a clear distinction between revelation and the Prophet and his life.
Right, yeah.
His life was, so for instance, one example, speaking on Sunnah and Hadith, we know that, so we say this is a Hadith Qudsi, right? So it is a Hadith, it's not part of Quran, but still it is let's say, not narrated, but conveyed by the prophet as it is.
Yeah.
Exactly, it came from the Creator. So this itself gives us the idea that not only Quran was not the only revelation that he received. He said, okay, this part of the revelation is Quran, keep it as Quran, he said, right? But we should understand that his entire life was the manifestation of the revelation. Some of the things that he received, he would himself said that he wouldn't narrate it, like he wouldn't articulate it, but he would show them. So, for instance, we know he was instructed how to pray by Jibril alayhi salam, right? But when companions asked him how to pray, he didn't, articulated what he heard.
He said, "Pray as you see me pray."
Exactly. He said, "Pray as you see me praying." So the revelation that he received, the speech that he received, is not only Quran. His entire life was a manifestation of a speech or a training that he received from the Creator. So we shouldn't, again, we shouldn't make any distinction between the prophethood and the message as a whole. That's one thing. But reason I said that, when we look at the Quran, the first thing we see is Ikra Bismi, again, Bismi what? Bismi Rabb. And Rabb, like your Rabb, right? So we can think about or talk about things in different names. So for instance, you can say don't lie or don't steal, but you will read this Bismi society, for instance. Ikra Bismi society, or human norms or social norms. You can establish such ethics in the name of other things. Today, for instance, we have humanism. It would also say don't lie, don't steal, and so on. But when we look in what name they read, we see that it's in the name of a perfect human, or in the name of a great idea. It's not in the name of your Rabb who created you. So for prophet, the same thing. When we see that he was not stealing, he was against stealing, we shouldn't read it in the name of some humanly norms or ethics. As a Muslim, we do that a lot. We say our prophet was a great person, he wouldn't lie. He was a great, human being. He wouldn't steal. He was the best philanthropist, we say. He would give the charity and so on. No, he was the best abd. He was the best worshipper, the slave of the Ram. That what he was. All these things we see about him, giving charity, not lying, and so on, was manifestation of that. So we shouldn't equate his giving charity versus Bill Gates giving charity. It's not the same thing at all. One is giving charity for certain reasons.
Yeah.
The other one giving the charity because he knows it doesn't belong to him.
Yeah. There's a I forget the Quranic verse that.
This is Sunnah.
Yeah.
Not Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Well, that was a question. I apologize.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the question that comes that I've received as well in those situations is beyond the intention or the state of mind of the one implementing, let's say, certain ethics or otherwise. Is there a practical difference in the end result? One person doesn't lie because of their humanism or their ethical framework they got from this or that source, and the other one doesn't lie in the name of trying to be an out. Now, of course, the experience of the two people might be very different, right? And the intention of the consciousness, but is the end result at all any different, and its consequences any different?
So if you ask me, I think the end results and the consequences are like one goes this way, the other one goes the opposite way. So let's look at the charity, for instance. If I give charity in the name of perfect society, to distribute the wealth in a perfect balance, the end result is some people will still stay poor, some others will still stay rich. This is the reality, right? And all of them will die. I will also die. And the money that I give will die, meaning losing its value. And at the end, I gain nothing, maybe a tiny pleasure out of it. This is my end result. We say practically they don't differ, but I guess the way we define practicality is so primitive. So we think something is practical when it is an action. Like I'm using my hand, my pocket, bring some money out of it and give the person. This is the action. Poor Bill Gates, I will continue from him. Maybe he's a great guy. Like,
right, but it is measured in terms of like, are the two actions physically the same?
Exactly. Yeah, maybe the actions physically the same, but it doesn't mean anything at all. Like the two things being physically same doesn't mean they are same. If I do it in the name of my creator, as a practical end result, what I gain is realizing, because what charity teaches me is that I don't own the money, and the one who gives me money has the infinite source.
So again, though, the change is in me, of course, right? But
this is the practical part
right,
of it.
But I'm saying, like, for example, a kitten, or let's say a baby. Baby needs a bottle of milk, and it's going to, let's make it dramatic, God forbid, it's going to, die if it doesn't get the bottle of milk from hunger. Now, two people can feed it. The physical action, again, will be the same, right? So then, of course, one can be, as you're saying it, and then the other can be just in terms of like, in the name of, I don't know.
How are you defining same though?
Like both are giving the bottle to the baby. So why I'm highlighting this is because the objection that comes is, well, the consequence is the same. The baby
What
is
about
dead.
the consequence that is created in you?
Yeah, that's
Right,
not the same.
so the consequence of like the recipient, at least, let's say, which is the baby, the experience that the baby will be receiving is the same.
It could be.
But of course, I do understand that obviously the consequence of the one that's doing it will be different. But
that's what matters to you, though. You can't
right,
speak about something else.
That is what matters to me. I'm just like wondering if there was more to say, because like this is something I've talked about in certain settings, and like the question, it's like, oh, like if the baby is going to have the same experience, is there anything different really in terms of everyone else concerned about the baby?
Yeah, if you are concerned is about the material world, so you already lost there. But anyway, Yusuf.
I think that the case here is we are isolating the what's going on in here, as if the event does not have any beginning, does not have anything further. It's only I give the milk to baby, baby drinks it, and baby is healthy. In both cases, this process seems to be the same. But when it is acting in the name of the creator, So what this comes with is acting according to it. Now it's a total framework, if you like. If you are giving this food to the baby or in recognition of Al-Razzaq, but you cannot simply say, I am acting in the name of the Creator and only act towards Razzaq. For example, you will also need to take into account Al-Adil, the just one. Then also you will need to take into account the provider, the sustainer, all the names. What I'm trying to say is, acting in the name of the Creator, or Sunnah actually, Sunnah is acting within the balance of all these divine names. But when it comes to humanitarianism, or let's say for your presentation, it's about being this environmentalist. So environmentalist is taking it from a certain perspective. So it's not, the balance is not there because it's one-worldly, and you're looking at it from a certain angle. And then, for example, your understanding, if you're an environmentalist, but a naturalist environmentalist, you would be buying the idea of survival of the fittest. This is your framework, so you cannot isolate this from you. So your understanding of justice becomes, so if you're strong, you have the right to beat the other one up. So which means, if I'm going to be saving, let's say, 100 people, I can sacrifice the lives of the 10 people. So this can easily become your understanding of justice.
Right.
Which means at the end,
We witnessed this practically, what way?
yeah. So at the end, what happens is it the same that a person who is looking at life with this divine name perspective, like prophetic tradition, versus someone who is doing it just for the sake of environmentalism or feeding the baby? Eventually, there is going to be a difference in the outcome as well, because there's going to be imbalance and injustice in other person's perspective.
You can't ever isolate the actions and the implications of those actions from that framework.
Because the issue, the question arises by just narrowing down it as if saying that it's only the baby is fed, it's the same.
That's what I want to clarify. Thank you.
And I think in here, one important point is Sunnah means a perfect balance when it comes to acting towards divine names. Because if a person knows it or not, even an environmentalist is going to be acting towards some divine name, without naming it as a divine name, practically speaking.
Yeah.
But since the notion of balance is not there, because the acknowledgement of the source being the same is not there, then there's going to be an imbalance.
Right.
This is why prophethood and sunnah of prophet is so important, because it means keeping in the perfect balance of how the Creator wants a human to be.
Right.
So this is why there is going to be a change in the end result in the outcome as well.
It's a recognition of divine will.
Yeah, and because there's always a physical manifestations of these divine names. So every divine names that we experience it through physical manifestations in this world, in this life. And because this is always the case, when you eliminate or when you cover certain divine names in your life, when you only concentrate the cuteness, let's say, of the baby, the one who creates beautiful, that's the divine name you're reading, right? When you only concentrate on that, the other divine names are covered. There will be always a physical manifestation of it as well. So, as you said, like last year, was it 2 years ago? Every environmentalist of the Philadelphia, for instance, suggesting us to kill this, what is the lantern flies. So it can be discussed, like whether we should kill it or not. I'm not saying that, if you kill these lantern flies, you are, committed sin. No, I'm not saying that at all. But that was a suggestion. That was the prime and common suggestion. What was even discussion? Because, this, yes, every, let's say, the natural living being deserves to live to the extent they do not interfere with us. or to the extent, we are not in conflict with them. I don't remember any, environmentalist, sorry for my pronunciation, objecting that. I remember I'm working in a building which attracts these flies. Certain time when I walk to my workplace, I'm walking through the graveyards, like the huge piles of that flies. That was done by an institution which serves the children. They are so, the lovely people. Again, I'm not, criticizing. I also sometimes kill mosquitoes or whatever. But the love by itself does not manifest again when we, when we cannot keep the balance. The fact that everything is created by Him. There is no such thing as survival of fittest. There's no such thing. In the universe, what we observe is creatures helping each other in the name of their creator. They're performing some duties. Every creature does something for the sake of their creator, but in the name of their creator, for the sake of other creatures. That's the only thing we see. Even when you look at from the love perspective, what you see in the universe is survival of fittest. The things conflict each other, fight each other. This is how they try to, make us believe.
Well, Osman, were you going to say something? Sorry. I'm not familiar with the lanternfly story, but
It is probably for this, it was specific to our region.
okay. But I get what you're saying. That's an interesting example. Their perspective is totally different for what the reason, what informs them about what they suggest or do. So.
And lanternflies are invading grapes, which in turn is affecting the brewery. So
The alcohol.
Alcohol production.
That's what they were trying to say.
It wasn't about trees. It's about bravery. So people were saying that kill those invaders because they are keep them alive.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, interesting. Where trying to deviate a little bit, but where would I find like these individuals that I can sort of observe and model my life afterward? I mean, like, where do I find them? Maybe they're in this room right now. So, and when I do find them, I guess what am I looking for to know that I found them? Like, what are these qualities? Like, what validates them to be these sort of people?
So with these people, let's make it clear that we are not talking about something mysterious or like a secret society or something that they are among us, like the aliens and
a Jedi Master.
Jedi Master, yeah, exactly. So we're not talking about such stuff, right? I mean, I do respect Jedi Masters, but yeah, in different ways.
Do I need to go to like Vegas to find Yoda or something, or where do I?
So, I think what we're talking here is again a tradition, right? Tradition that is conveyed by people. And how am I going to find these people to make and what is the purpose again? Let's remind us.
Yeah.
What is the purpose? The purpose is to make a connection, a living connection, hence the people, living connection with prophet. And the people are the leaves of this prophethood tree. So I would say, I don't know if there's a radical suggestion or not, but to me, like when I look at the lives of the scholars, this is what I see, is that you look for such people around you. Like in everyone, you interact with, you ask the question, to what extent this person can teach me about my prophet? So I look at, let's say, Atik or Zechariah, and I ask the question, what I can learn? Because as a framework, as a theoretical, let's say, framework, I know that there must exist a connection between me and my prophet, and it must be through some people. So I look at the Zechariah and I say that, what Zechariah can teach me about my prophet. That would be what I'm looking for. And if he comes and claims that, the prophet did this or that, did that, or he used to live this way or that way, then I would start hearing him, because that's my intention, right? That's my goal. I would say, okay, I'm listening now. Tell me or show me. And then whatever he says, I would. At the very beginning, we said, you would remember that different books, if we can say, that we have. The book of creation, the universe, our lives. The scripture, the book of Quran. And then the book of prophet, whatever we know about him. So you would check what he says against all these different sources and see whether it makes sense or not, whether there's any conflict or not. For instance, if he says, do you know what the prophet used to drink the mercury? I would say, what are you talking about? Like, obviously, you're making up, like, if I drink it, I will die. So it conflicts with the reality. Or prophet used to do that. Look at, prophet used to force people into religion. And then I look at the message that he brings, the Quran, where it says there is no absolute, la ikra, right? It's an absolute negation. It's not only negation, like the grammatical, right? It's the absolute negation. There is no force. I would say, this cannot be true, I'm sorry. Or the way he acts. So my intention, I guess the most important thing here is my intention. My intention would be trying to learn something from him as a living example, because I think that the people, there must be some people at least around me, otherwise my creator would leave me alone in darkness. He wouldn't do that, it's against his wisdom. I'm sure there must be some people who tries to implement the prophetic way of living. I'm sure if it's not Zechariah, there must be someone else. And every person would do it in different, of course, extent. Zechariah, for instance, would never lie because prophet never lied. And I will learn this from Zechariah. And then from him, Muhammad, from Muhammad, I would try to see what kind of humility he has, and to the extent again he connects it to the prophet. So if somebody coming and telling me, "Oh, Vikram, do you know what such and such philosopher said this, and we should implement this," I wouldn't even listen. I would say, this is not what I need. I mean, this philosopher or the artist or the poet might have said something nice. I'm not, rejecting this. It must be true, and I can benefit from it for other reasons as well. But in my search for prophet, that wouldn't be my door to knock. But if somebody claiming that, his attitude or his understanding goes back to prophet, then I would listen, and I would try to adapt it to the extent I believe I am convinced that it is coming from the prophet.
I guess in one sense you're saying that there's probably no one perfect person Like, this person is the person I should follow if I want to know who the prophet is.
Yeah, there's no such person. Yeah, I mean, the prophet as a whole is not there maybe,
Yeah,
but it doesn't mean we lost our access to whole.
yeah,
We still have access, but through maybe different
people.
people. And also, the among people as well is not the same equal.
Yeah,
There are certain people, certain scholars, for instance, they manifest the tradition of the prophet, implements the tradition of the prophet much better than Yusuf does, for instance. I would follow them, such a scholar, much, more seriously than I follow Yusuf.
but it doesn't mean you couldn't learn something from it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I would learn and I would follow Yusuf
yeah,
to the extent it connects me to my prophet.
Hmm.
The rest, I would say, is another human being. Yusuf was.
no, go ahead.
Actually, this makes me think about how making prayer in congregation is encouraged by the messenger. So, like it is said that it's going to be 27 times more rewarding. So what does that imply? Like other than some mathematical calculation that it's going to be 27 times how you would do it in your house, it also means like when I do prayer in congregation, I'm going to be seeing other people. So what is it that I will see in other people? Like we are here together to get to know my maker, my creator. We gathered for the same purpose, and I'm going to see whatever we study together, it's going to appear different in Atik, different in Muhammad, and I will try to get the same thing as it fits me. So it's like this congregation is an opportunity to see the reflection of revelation over people.
Yeah.
So this had been there since the very beginning. And if you think about it, Hajj is the utmost example of that congregation. The whole Ummah is being invited to get congregated in a single place. Why is that? Then I will see how that looks in Pakistanis, Bangladesh people, and I don't know, the other places. So it's all that I am being invited to see revelation on people and to get to learn from that. This human interaction being a fundamental part of me understanding what my creator asks from me. So Prophet had been the first teacher of that school, but that school kept going on and he encouraged us when he was there as well to stay together to practice this, understand this, and continue that over generations.
So I guess in a sense then, am I just like, maybe we'll wrap up with this pretty soon, but then, I mean, we've talked about profiting for 2 days now. So does that mean that eventually, or potentially, or am I already like part of this tree you said? Am I like, are we all just part of the tree, a branch or a leaf or something? Is it possible? Can we be a part of it? Are we already a part of it? We just don't realize it.
I would say, like, to the extent you have a connection with the prophet,
Yeah.
to the extent in your life you try to implement a prophetic way in your life,
Yeah.
yes, you are then connected to this tree of prophet. You are benefiting from the prophet. And you are being maybe a fruit for others as well.
Yeah.
But I guess one important thing here, we should take it serious that our entire life, just like companions, this is a recommendation first and foremost myself, because I see a huge deficit there in me. That we should take making a connection with the prophet is our prime goal in our life. Like, if we are complaining about the ways that we, connected with the prophet, oh, I don't know enough about him. I don't know about the trustworthiness of these sources and so on. Study them.
Yeah.
Spend time. Oh, I don't know Arabic. I cannot, understand it. Study it. Again, this is not a complaint about any people. Like this is the self-critic. So I should be aware that these are not excuses, especially when I think about my life. The things that I learned.
Or like our focus or priority.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like all these achievements given to me when I asked for them shows that a human being can gain everything he needs or she needs. Ask for them. Search for these scholars. Engage with people with this mindset. Engage with the people to see what you will learn from them as a part of the prophetic tradition again. Not how to get dressed or something. See how they treat each other, how he treats his wife. And whether he's taking this, like whether he's following a prophetic model or not. If he's following the Pakistani model, this is how we treat our wife in our culture. Say, okay, this is for you. Sorry, not for me. Or he's doing the Turkish style. I'm sorry. Even though I'm Turkish, this is not what I'm looking for. If somebody is modeling the prophetic way, then I would follow him. Engage with people. Spend time. Look at their lives. A dear friend of me, a brother, older brother of me, my teacher, actually, one of my teachers, he would say, we don't invite people to our house anymore, our homes, which is an important missing point in our lives. Inviting people to our homes to share our lives and then sharing their lives. This is how we're going to make connection with our prophet.
That's what he did.
Exactly what he did. Engage. Again, take it serious. Have discussions with people for that sake, not for the sake of intellectual enlightenment or something. To learn about your prophet, his way, or teach his way to others. So that should be our prime goal in life. The rest, we're just wasting. I'm like a majority of my life, unfortunately, I'm wasting. Like just because I'm sitting here doesn't mean that I'm the one who's following the prophet most. It's more like I need this most.
Reminding for myself.
And inshallah, I will do it one day.
Inshallah.
So, yeah.
Well, I think we will wrap it up there unless anybody has any questions. Everybody looks tired, so we'll end it there. Pretty intense 6 seconds, so. All right, anything else you want to add?
So maybe we should, Yusuf, would you like to help us with a salawat? Like we should end sending our respect to our God Prophet, maybe.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد بالقلوب ودوائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه وسلم آمين. لله رب العالمين.